Joining me now is Alexandra Stockwell, MD. She is an international best-selling author for her book, Uncompromising Intimacy, and the host of the highly acclaimed show, The Marriage Podcast. Welcome to the show, Dr. Stockwell.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
I'm so glad you're here because you are a love and intimacy mentor known as the Intimacy Doctor. And this show is about sexuality and intimacy. So it's a perfect fit, I think. And I thought maybe we could start with talking about intimacy. Do you feel that intimacy can be built at any stage in a relationship? What are your thoughts about it?
Oh, I definitely think so. I think most fundamentally that having a fantastic relationship is a learnable skill. And I think it can really be learned at any point in a relationship or in an individual's life when they're willing to put attention on it and learn it, or learn it more, I should say.
Mm-hmm. I love the way you said that, a learnable skill, because I think a lot of times people feel like they should just know what to do. And it seems like that's not really true.
Yes, it is this remarkable, I'm not sure if it's an irony or what it is, but we all know that we're not going to be born knowing how to do calculus. And we all know we're not even going to be born knowing how to count by fives. Like that is something we learn, as is most of the things that we have our attention on. I guess we learn to walk and talk, and it happens naturally without any particular education, we might say, but that's not entirely true. The education is role modeling and seeing other people do it. And so I think that because from our time of birth, we are in relationship with people and we don't know ourselves without relationship with people, we just kind of assume that's our native place. But it really is an area where learning is very worthwhile.
I think you're right. And, people reach out to me for all kinds of reasons related to wellness. And recently, the reason I decided to do this show is because many people, I'm not sure if it's a result of partially the pandemic and people being alone with a partner for a long period of time or what, but asking what I think about intimacy and, how they can get it back, or do I have any ideas, and that's not really my area of expertise. So I'm so excited to hear what you might say about that.
Let me start by telling you about one of the couples that I coached first when I transitioned from practicing medicine to really going fully into being a relationship and intimacy coach. I coached a couple. They had been married, I believe, 19 years. They had a child in high school and a child in middle school, and they hadn't had sex in 9 months. And this was a couple that was not thinking about divorce. They loved one another, but they really weren't finding connection outside of logistics, things about the children, financial management. But other than that, they'd each go to different parts of the house and do their own thing when the day was otherwise over. And so they came to me because they wanted to figure out intimacy in the sensual, erotic sense. And so I'm absolutely capable to help them. And the first maybe 3 or 4 sessions, I focused on what I call emotional intimacy, just the emotional connection and rebuilding rapport, because it's challenging enough for a couple with challenges to talk about sex in an explicit or explicit enough way without just not having had a really good conversation in a while. So I focused on the rapport and having fun together, because when things are troubled in a marriage or a committed relationship, it's so common to just forget about what's actually good and why you're with this person. The troubling things kind of take up a lot more real estate in our minds and thoughts. So anyway, those first few sessions, I really just gave them some suggestions, and in our conversations together, guided them to rebuild rapport.
Mm. That
And
seems
then,
so important. Wow.
so important. But the thing that I learned so much about was then in the fourth session, I thought, okay, now we're ready to get to the real thing they came to me for, right? So I said, well, I was very gentle. I said, well, let's transition to talking about other things. And they didn't know what I was talking about. They were confused. And so I thought, and then finally I saw her eyes open and she started giggling and kind of looking at him. And she's like, oh, we're all set with that.
Ah,
We're all set. We don't need to focus on that. We're having what we want to be having. And that happens about 80% of the time when I'm coaching couples, that really learning how to be vulnerable, how to
Mhm.
be connected, how to enjoy the depth of emotional connection
Mhm.
is all that's necessary to pave the way to be touching one another in beautiful ways again. It's not always the whole thing, but it
Sure.
often is. And so, while yes, I am definitely an intimacy expert and I can discuss any aspect of sexuality, the reality is that in helping committed couples, the absolute majority of my time is spent teaching people what are actually much more vulnerable primary skills.
Hmm. So communication must come in there as well.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm glad to share a few tools. One of the things which opens things up, it really never ceases to amaze me, but it always works, is curiosity. Because if you think of the experience of being in love, you are so curious, where did you get that scar? And what is your favorite vegetable? And what books do you love to read? And what kind of music do you like? We just can't get enough of who is this person.
Right, right.
And then it's very lovely. We get comfortable, we get secure, things are more familiar. We know what our partner likes to eat or what kinds of things are likely to order or what kind of movies. Like, there is something very beautiful in being with someone whom you know well and who knows you
Mhm.
well.
Mhm.
But very often, what's lost in that is the curiosity, because we continue to grow and evolve. And even if you already know how I got that scar, there are so many new things to ask. So, one of the places to start, especially for anyone who contacted you with these questions,
Mhm.
is to just start asking more questions and really listening with interest to the answer. Don't ask if you're not interested. And I like to emphasize that in any given relationship, what questions you ask are going to vary. They can be whimsical, they can be silly, they can be profound, they can be about sexual fantasies. Some, just to get started, might be, if you could be president of any country in the world, which one would it be and what changes would you implement?
Wow,
Or,
that's a great question.
right, it's fun to
Mhm.
think about. And
Yes.
the answer might be different next week. So it's okay to ask it again. And if it's the
Mhm.
same, that's interesting too. Or if you could have dinner with any celebrity, alive or dead, who would it be? And what would you ask them?
Mm. Also a great question. Yes. Right. These stimulate conversations and probably new information, even though you think you really know somebody, if you, especially if you've been in a long relationship. These are questions you probably never talked about, you know.
Yeah. And if someone is a diehard Bruce Springsteen fan, then maybe you already know, but maybe you don't know that the answer would be Cleopatra. These are
Mm.
things to discover.
I read that you feel that compromise kind of kills relationships, and I would love to hear more about that.
Yes. I like that you picked up on that because it really is far and away the most common relationship advice that's given, especially for long-term relationships, that if you want to be happy, you have to learn to compromise.
Mm-hmm.
And if what you want is a bland, pleasant companionship, a conflict-free, passion-free relationship, then compromise will definitely get you that.
Mm.
But
Right.
if what you want is passion and a dynamic, evolving, exciting relationship, which is both beautifully stable and wonderfully spontaneous, then uncompromising intimacy will get you there. But I need to define uncompromising intimacy, because often when people hear it the first time, they think, well, does that mean I get my way all the time? Because with compromise, you don't get your way. Being uncompromising must mean you do. And that is not what it means.
Okay.
In the case of compromise, we hold back how we feel or what we want or what we're thinking in order to have our partner be more comfortable.
Mm.
And in being uncompromising, you don't become a bully, you don't get your way all the time, but you don't hold back just so that your partner is comfortable. You still bring all of who you are, your desires, your dreams, your thoughts. And this can be very simple. It can be what you want to have for dinner, whether you want more salt. It can be about an investing strategy. I mean, this can be in any kind of situation that you say what you want. And when you're both saying what you want, then together you can make a collaborative decision about how you want to go forward.
Mm.
But you don't end up feeling, as many people do. I was going to say many women, but the fact is, good men feel this way too. They're usually less conscious of it. But in any case, many, and there are relationships where both people are compromising. And what that means is that they're leaving a part of who they are outside of the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And what makes for passion and juiciness and really intimate connection is when you can be yourself and you have the capacity to receive who your partner is. Because if you're wishing for your partner to change, then you're not really accepting who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And you're requiring them to leave a part of themselves out. And so this is a very profound spiritual journey.
Mm-hmm.
And if someone isn't spiritual, they don't need to think of it as a spiritual journey. It can just be a mindset practice. But to notice, when are you just adjusting
Mm-hmm.
so it's more comfortable for your partner, or not even bringing it up? And when your partner shares something, when are you making it unduly hard or impossible for them to share it because it's too uncomfortable for you?
Mm-hmm.
So uncompromising intimacy means really putting attention on expressing yourself fully with kindness, but
Sure.
fully,
Mm-hmm.
and noticing if you're attempting to have your partner stay contained because their full expression is necessary too.
Right. So if a couple can't agree on something specific, and we've all been taught we need to compromise, right? How do you get through that so that you're both feeling heard and living as your true self, as you mentioned?
Well, let me give an example that isn't about a difference of opinion, and then we can come back to that if
Sure.
you guide us there, because the really important tool in cultivating and embodying uncompromising intimacy is learning to communicate with vulnerability. And there is, that all sounds very nice, and we've heard of Brene Brown, but how do you actually do it? Because I tend to think understanding is overrated. What really matters is what you can live and experience and create. And so,
I understand. Yes. You can understand all day, right?
That's
but
right.
Then,
Understanding does not make for a better time in bed. but
Mhm.
embodying and implementing it certainly can. So when it comes to a vulnerable conversation, I really enjoy using the example of my husband not doing the dishes because it's so benign and yet it's so common. So let's say he and it's a Monday night. I have an important meeting Tuesday morning. We're done with dinner. And I say, would you do the dishes? I want to prepare for my meeting because I have to get up early tomorrow. And my husband's a very good man. We've been married 25 years. And in that scenario, he 100% of the time is going to say, sure, I'd be glad to.
Mhm.
So he says this. And the next morning I get up and I go into the kitchen and the dishes aren't done.
Mhm.
And I have a lot of choices there. I can compromise and just not say anything and ignore it and stuff it and pretend it doesn't bother me. I can start doing the dishes and clanking them and making a lot of noise so everybody in the house knows that I am now doing the dishes, right?
Right.
I can have a fit. I can start talking to one of my children in a way that is too intense and inappropriate because I'm letting my feelings about my husband not doing the dishes come out sideways. We all know, like we all have our go-to flavor in that kind of frustrating situation.
Mhm.
But instead of becoming explosive or compromising and suppressing it, what I will say, and probably that evening, it doesn't need to happen right away, is I have something really vulnerable to share with you. Are you available to hear it? And so that is step one, to get opt-in from your partner, because if you just start telling something, you're
Mhm.
not likely to have the conversation you want. But I will say, I have something vulnerable to share with you. Are you available to hear it? And he's either going to say yes, or he's going to say no. And ideally, in a committed relationship, no is not yet. He might say, you know what, I just want to have dinner and shower and then I'll be available. And it's very important that when I ask that question, it's a real question. It's not
Right.
just a pro forma statement, but I'm going ahead anyway.
Right. Mhm.
And then when we have that conversation, I'm going to tell him why I'm telling him and what the desired outcome is for the conversation. And when I tell him why I'm telling him, that really can only happen if I've taken the time to figure it out.
Mhm.
Because telling him because I am mad is not a good enough reason. That's not a vulnerable communication. That's something else.
Mhm.
And I'll give an example, but I am also going to want to make sure to say what my desired outcome is, because otherwise the normal first reaction is to get defensive or
Mhm.
to check out. And even if it's physically there, he stopped listening because he's feeling attacked or he attacks me. But once we're clear what the goal is and we're both into that goal, then he can rally with me. So I like to think that the step one is the opt-in. Step two, it's really focused on me. Like, why am I telling this? And step three, where I say the desired outcome, that needs to be something he's really excited about also. So
Mm.
in this case, I might say, I want to tell you something because it's really been bothering me. And my desired outcome is that we can have a really fun evening together because I won't be holding on to this anymore. Like
Mhm.
why I'm telling him what the desired outcome is, they can be very simple, but it's worth stating them.
Sure.
And then I'm not in a vulnerable communication going to say, you gave me your word and you didn't do it. That is not a vulnerable communication. A vulnerable communication is conveying how I feel. So, for example, when I got up in the morning and I saw you didn't do the dishes, I felt taken for granted and unseen and unimportant to you. It's the vulnerable communication is something that I feel that I'm not blaming anybody for. I'm just describing
Right.
that
Stating how
when
you
I
feel.
saw the dishes weren't done, I felt unimportant, taken for granted, and like my experience doesn't matter to you. And if I just said that, my husband would close down. But hearing me taking responsibility and he's given the opt-in and he knows what my goal is, then he's going to follow through the next time. And either way, he's going to understand that I'm taking this opportunity to reveal more of who I am. It's not to put him in his place. Another
Right.
way to think about how to build bedroom intimacy is to use every experience to create more connection.
I love that. That whole scenario play. I was smiling in the beginning because I have had that scenario in my
Yes,
relationship, as many people probably do. But it sounds like you. So for me, when things like that happen, some resentment can build. But instead, the way you described it, and also giving the other person the opportunity to let you know when they're available to talk about it, all of it is so respectful, that I can see how that would build more intimacy, rather than create an argument,
Yes, because compromise naturally leads to resentment. And whether it's just like one grain of salt from a particular compromise or a whole mountain, it adds up.
Mhm.
And so that needs to be dealt with regardless.
Well, we're coming to the end of our time, but I would love for you to give information about how people can get in touch with you.
Okay, wonderful. Please come listen to the Intimate Marriage Podcast. You called it the Marriage Podcast, and I've rebranded it since I sent you information. So I
Oh,
want
you
to
did.
emphasize.
Excellent.
Yes. So
Mhm.
going forward, it's the Intimate Marriage Podcast, where I give tools like this in every episode, and the intimatemarriagepodcast.com, where you can find me and my programs and my book and anything else that you'd like to find.
Excellent. Thanks so much for joining me, Dr. Stockwell.
Thank you, Wendy.